Hello, welcome everybody to this webinar this evening, where we're going to be having a look at ways of trying to improve the profitability of your construction business. This is quite a broad topic, and I'm going to try and cover it in the hour. So lots to cover. Some of it you'll probably find quite obvious. Some of it you may think, oh, I hadn't realized that's what you should do. As you can imagine, here at HBXL, we have all sorts of builders who work with us. Some of them have got a lot of experience. Some of them are new to the game. A lot of people start as tradesmen and work their way up to become professional builders. So it's always very interesting to meet people. Right, so let's get on with the show, as they say. Right, so I've divided this session into 5 basic components, plus a demo of Quick Quote if we have time at the end of it. And if you've got any questions, please ask me. I'll try and glance at my question screen periodically and answer any questions, but there's clearly a limitation to how many I can do when you've got a lot of people watching. So the 5 sections we're going to be looking at is improving the accuracy of your estimates, ensuring that you set the profit margin correctly, that you earn the margin that you want. A few tips on how to present your quote in order to maximize your success, and then a few odds on running your business efficiently using the software to help you with that. And finally, a quick tip on perhaps running an accounting system to integrate with our software to make sure that what you think is happening in the business is actually being measured very regularly. Okay, so we'll start with the first topic, improving the accuracy of your estimate. And again, probably preaching to the converted a lot of the time, but often I'm surprised when people say, oh, I don't allow for any overheads, or I don't mark the price up. I just use, I work out my labor and materials, and that's the price I quote, because I know that I've got to be, very competitive to win work around here. It's a very competitive world. Okay, that's a perception, but it is incorrect, and there is plenty of opportunity to make a sensible margin. You're not ripping your customers off, but you are earning a good living for doing what is a very complicated and tiring job. Having run my own business for many years, I know that you have to work very hard thinking about all the tasks that have to be done in a job. You have to bring a lot of expertise in terms of building knowledge, and also business knowledge and knowledge of the construction process, planning, permission, building regs, and so on. So it's a complicated job, and you need to set yourself a margin that makes it worthwhile. Otherwise, you may as well go back to an ordinary job, perhaps as a tradesman or perhaps as a professional prior to starting your business. So we're going to have a look at the actual process of estimating the job with a quick demo of Estimator Express. So we're going to look at the items that wrap around the process. So overheads, what are they? Well, I think there's no rocket science here, but there are things like if you have an office or some storage that you're paying for, the general management of the business. Now, often that will be the boss of the company. He will spend a proportion of his time running the business, estimating, visiting the site, speaking to the clients, and so on. It takes a long time out of his working day. If you're a tradesman, well, that time has a value, and you should account for that in your overhead. Otherwise, again, you may as well go back on the tools as just work for nothing, managing the job. You'll have things like insurances to pay for, accountants and bookkeeping, secretarial, sales and marketing, websites, advertising. All of these are gnawing away at your profits. So it's essential that you build those into your quote. When I was running my building company, I found it quite difficult to get this much down below about 12%. It often used to bob up to 15% overall. So don't underestimate how much it costs, and it can be disproportionately high if you have a small business as compared to somebody who's slightly running a bigger show. Although as you get larger, you then find that you need to have site foremen and the likes, and the overheads will creep back up again. So a good rule of thumb is 12 to 15%, I would think, of overhead. So if you're going to make no profit whatsoever, you would have to add at least that 15% onto your job to break even, as it were. The other thought to bear in mind is that any builder who's running his business has got those same overheads. So if he is undercutting you and you're going in at zero margin, he's not covering his overheads, and there is actually no point in trying to compete with that guy. It's a road to nowhere. So here's a sort of typical snapshot of what somebody's overheads might look like. In this sample, for argument's sake, I've got the guy may have a yard where he's storing bits of equipment, maybe parking his lorry. He's working part-time as the manager, so he's nominally allowing half of his time, say 25 or 30,000 quid, to cover that cost. He's got a couple of vans, he's got insurances to pay for, accountants at the end of the year or monthly. You should really be tracking your the profitability of your business month by month to make sure that you're making the money that you think you are, so that you don't get your accounts 12 months after the event and think, blimey, we haven't made any money, I wonder where it's all gone. It's really important to track it as you go along. So in this scenario here, we've got a total overhead of £75,000 for somebody running a medium scale builder. It's about the size of the average size of a typical HBXL user. Now, of course, your overheads will be different. You will have a different perspective on it. But it's perhaps worth having a chat with your bookkeeper or your accountant and get their take on what your overheads are before you start estimating your jobs. So again, in this example, I'm suggesting that maybe this builder's turning over 500,000. It may be that you're turning over £1 million. It may be that you're only turning over 100,000 or 200,000, but the same principles apply. Once you've worked out your overhead, you can then work out what your percentage overhead as expressed to the turnover. And by turnover, I mean the total amount that you're charging your customer. That's what I would describe as the turnover. So in this case, we've got overheads of 75,000 and we've got a target turnover of 500,000. So somewhere in the mix, you are going to have to recover that 15% on each and every job that you do as you target your £500,000 or your £200,000 or whatever it is. So, having worked out that as a basic minimum you've got to cover that 15%, you've then got to think about profit. Now again, I'm often surprised as I go around the country meeting builders in my demo days as to what people add on, and I can tell you I get told all sorts of stories. I've been told that they don't put any markup, any overhead, and they don't put any profit in because the market's too competitive. Often within the same day, I will speak to people who say, oh no, we're really busy and we're making good profits. We can put good margins on. So it is very much about perception. It's very important that you don't get what I call price fright. You put in a sensible margin for the job that you've got in hand, and you earn a decent turn on it. So turning back to our hypothetical builder, let's say he is suggesting that he wants to make 10% profit. So if he turns over 500,000, he wants to make £50,000 profit on it, which I don't think is unreasonable. He may not make that exactly, but it's by no means a fanciful idea. I'm sure there are a lot of people making a lot more than that. I'm absolutely certain there are a lot of people making a lot less. So in order to make his 10%, he must take into account the 15% overhead at first. So you have to add your 10% onto that. So in total, you've got 25% as your gross margin that you need to make your gross profit. So 25% of 500,000 is 125,000. And this, as I said, is often called the gross profit, the profit before your overheads kick in and nibble away at your profit. Now, this bit often confuses people because they say, well, if I want to make 10%, I'm just going to add 10% to the cost of the actual cost of labour and materials, or I'm going to add 25% to the cost of the materials and I'll make 25% on it before overhead. No, that's not the case. The way to actually work it out is to divide the 375,000, i.e. the bit that's left over after your 500,000, and that will give you your markup that you need to apply, which I've actually got on my next slide. So there you can see it. We've got £500,000 turnover, and before overheads we've got to actually do £375,000 worth of building work. So in order to get your 25% gross, you've actually got to mark it up by 33%, because 500,000 divided by 375 is 1.33. So let me give you an example of what that might look like. If you were, say, doing a £50,000 job, which included the labour, plant and materials and so on, subcontract costs, in order to make your 10% profit, you must mark that job up by 33%. So in the case of our £50,000 job, 50,000 plus the 33% is £66,666. You're not adding 25% to the 50,000, you're adding 33%. And the 33% is a pretty good rule of thumb. You know, a lot of people will quite happily mark up between 30 and 35%, and 40% is by no means unreasonable in a bullish market if you have a good reputation and a full order book. So, what's on this screen here? If you look down the bright yellow column in the middle of the screen, you'll see those same calculations that we've just been through. You've got your total overhead at 75,000. The profit that we require on this particular column was 10%, which is at 50,000. The total overheads and profit came to 125,000, and that's left us with 375,000 of actual building work that we have to do. And if you look right at the very bottom of the column, you'll see that our actual profit margin is 50,000, because we said we wanted to make 10% on it. Right, so what's the purpose of this table? Well, if you look to the left and the right columns, you'll see that the left-hand column says, okay, making 10%, in my view, Adrian, is impossible. I think I'm only going to make 5%. And you can see at the bottom what that actually means, unsurprisingly, is that you're going to make £25,000. If you mark it at 15%, you're going to make £75,000. So by simply moving the dial, as it were, from 5% to 15%, you can effectively treble your profit. So you're not trebling your overall margin because your overheads are likely to remain pretty static. You're still going to have to pay for your management. You're still going to have your vans and your insurance. Your accountant is unlikely to charge you less. You're still going to pay for your advertising. But by just tweaking your profit margin by 10%, you can make a huge difference on your profit at the end of the year. And again, if we think about, say, our £10,000 job, our £50,000 job, if you moved your profit margin from the 10%, i.e. £55,000, up to 15%, that would give you 57,500. So you're only actually moving the price 2.5 grand, which, trust me, people will not notice. If you've presented yourself properly, people will buy at that price. We hear about it over and over again. In fact, we work with a group called Better Business Group, and they specialize in helping builders to improve their profits. And the differences that they see in the price for the same job is absolutely astronomical. They will see, for argument's sake, a job where one builder is pricing at 50,000 and another builder is quoting at 80,000, and the client in the end ends up paying 65 or 70,000. So it's very easy to see that price is more about perception than the actual calculation. And if there's one thing to carry away from you in this, is you don't have to go in at a rock bottom price to get the work. It's simply not necessary. I can remember actually speaking to my bank manager when I first set up, telling him I was marking up 25%. And he said to me, you need to move it up to 35%. And I thought, well, I'll never win any work. I moved it up to 35%, and it didn't make any difference whatsoever to my win rate. I just carried on winning, and the business kept on growing. It's hard to believe, but that is the reality. Okay, so the big takeaway here is make sure you mark up your prices that you work out in your estimating work. And I would suggest by default 30% is the minimum that you should mark up your direct costs in order to deliver a relatively small margin. You'll probably end up making 7 or 8% at that rate. Okay, so I can now hear some of you saying, well, that's impossible. I'd never win any work. No, nobody will pay me to do that. And all I can say is, trust me, it isn't as you think. And if you follow some of the tips that I'm going to suggest, you'll soon be thinking, wow, I'm glad somebody told me about that. And if you think about it, if everything was driven by the cheapest price, we'd all be driving around in cheap cars and wearing cheap clothes and eating at cheap restaurants. And of course we don't. All of us like quality, we like good value, we like reliability, and we're all prepared to pay for that. Otherwise we'd all be buying the cheapest of everything. And it is an actual fact that our builders, who we go back to after they bought our software and taken some of our advice, is that despite the fact that they're charging more for their work, in part because the software has actually not forgotten a load of stuff that they still find that they at least double their success rate. So again, that confirms the perspective that charge a good rate and you will get it. Of course, you've got to present yourself correctly, and we're going to talk about that now. And again, this is not rocket science, so forgive me if I'm preaching to the converted. But the whole process of winning any sale really is about building trust with your client. And when I was building, and I built over 300 extensions with a very high success rate at sensible margins, I adopted this process. And so it's not rocket science, and many of you will be doing it. So the main thing is to take time with your client. You need to spend time with them at the early stages so that they get to know you and they start to build up trust. Because let's face it, you're going to be coming into their house and banging big holes in their walls, and they've probably got a property that's worth many hundreds of thousands, which is extremely important to them. So they really need to be sure that you're a good bloke and you're likely to have a good team to come into the house. So take time with them, get time to make friends with them, demonstrate that you know what you're talking about, take measurements, look down the drains, look at the electrics in detail, so that they're assured that you are actually thinking about their job and that you're not just perhaps sending in a price based on the architect's drawing, which may or may not represent the work in its totality. Often you will find that there are discrepancies on the drawing or things that don't quite work, and by discussing that with the client, you start to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about, and you stand out in the mind of the client. Right, so start to build trust. Now, once you've done all that measurement, you then need to prepare a detailed quote. And obviously, we're a software company. We can show you how you can do that using our software. And I'm hoping that we'll have a few minutes at the end of this to give you a quick demonstration of our quick quote software. So, and again, by providing them with a detailed quote that's very transparent, it actually shows them exactly what they're getting for their money. It demonstrates to them why this particular job is very expensive. We're probably all used to the fact that things are very expensive because that's the world that we live in. But the amount of money that people are having to pay out for an extension or a new house, it is pretty eye-watering if you stand back and think about it for a few moments. It's a big investment for them. So again, the more information that you can give to them that helps them understand the job, the better. But of course, doing it manually is very time consuming, and we speak to many builders who say they spend many hours every day over the weekend, late into the night, preparing estimates. And to do it properly is very time consuming. But with our software, you can do it relatively quickly. Simple jobs you can do in half an hour. A more complicated job, yes, you might spend 2 or 3 hours, or even a morning if it's a job worth a few £100,000. It's often a good idea, it's actually essential actually, that you provide your customer with a legally binding contract so that they know exactly what to expect from you. And in the event that they turn sour on you and they don't want to pay their bill, either because they're rogues or something has gone wrong, unless you have got a legally binding contract, you are skating on very thin ice. Even if they have no foundation for their complaint against the quality of the work, if you haven't got a properly drawn up contract, you are in default and they can walk away with paying you your dues. And of course they leave that right to the end and end up taking all your profit. As you probably know, we also provide a health and safety documentation, a health and safety expert, and if you can demonstrate that to the client as part of the process of presenting the quote, then again it reassures them that you know what you're doing and that you're not going to drop them in it by not having the appropriate paperwork, because as I'm sure most of you know, they are actually liable to ensure that you do the work properly. And by having the correct paperwork, you can demonstrate to them that you can do that. So again, it's all about trust. If you think about it, if you give them a detailed quotation, the price is sensible, with all this wraparound information, you are head and shoulders above people who are going in on the cheap. So the next tip, it often surprises me when I speak to people and they say, well, I've emailed loads of quotes to the client and I don't ever hear from them. Well, of course you don't, because again, they're not buying from a person. We're all bombed with spam these days. People don't see the value in a quote. If you're doing it manually, you may have spent many hours, and if you actually think of the cost of preparing that quote, if you just whiz off an email, it might have cost you a couple of £100 in your time to prepare the quote, and it just disappears into the void and you never hear from them again. But if you go and see them, eyeball them, again, you show them again that you're interested, you run through the quote, you demonstrate all that you've included in it, again, they're going to think, well, now this guy really knows what he's talking about and I can see why this is so expensive. So do take the time to revisit with the quote. It'll pay for itself over and over again in terms of profit margin. Don't just email them. It's a bad idea. One thing just to mention in passing, if you are interested, we also have a piece of software called Plans Express, and that allows you to either prepare a sketch of their extension from scratch or trace over an architect's drawing, and from that it will also automatically build the estimate for you. Excuse me. And it will also produce 3D plans and so on. So, sorry, the phone there made me lose my train of thought. Sorry about that. So yes, by presenting a 3D image like that, again, it puts you head and shoulders above the competition. So I would strongly recommend that you consider something like that if you really want to boost your profitability. When I was running my business, I actually provided a design and build service, and I can really recommend that because it knocks away the competition. If you go there, take time to design the project for them, give them a detailed quote. By the time you've been through that process, quite honestly, nobody else really gets a look in. So do consider that, if you feel confident with computers. So obviously the next thing to do is actually create the accurate estimate. Meter squared prices are okay for giving the client an idea of the sort of cost you're expecting, but it is quite dangerous to proceed without a detailed quote. As we were seeing earlier, if you just move the dial slightly downwards, if you're 5% out, you can find that you're making no money whatsoever. So don't use guesstimating. It can be very dangerous, and you may not find out for 12 or 18 months once you get your accounts how bad your guessing is. So from the estimating perspective, you obviously need to have a system that allows you to carefully build up the labour, plant and material, the subcontract cost, all the sundry costs and so on, making allowance for any specialist site management if you've actually got them on site, which probably are in addition to your own time. You need a system that allows you to track material prices. They've gone up enormously in the last 12 or 18 months. Make sure that you have a system that tracks them. And in fact, our system will even predict the inflation effect peering ahead. So if you're not starting a job for 2 or 3 months, and it's going to take you 3, 4, 5, 6 months to complete, by the time you get to the end of that job, the materials and labour are going to be more expensive. Estimator Express will automatically take that into account. So that's a really useful function. Don't forget to build in wastage. Now, wastage comes in all forms, really. It covers a multitude of sins, really. You may have true wastage, where materials are physically wasted. You might get breakages. You might get things that are chipped. I mean, we allow for wastage on things like doors and windows and sanitary ware. You may say, well, how am I going to waste a bit of sanitary ware? Well, every now and again, one of them gets broken. So it's a good idea as part of your overall strategy to build in an allowance for wastage and theft on those sorts of items. Again, none of this is rocket science, so forgive me if I'm preaching to the converted. Once you've got your estimate, obviously the name of the game is managing it effectively. And once you get into a rhythm of building multiple jobs, and as you can imagine, when I was building, we'd have up to 10 or 15 jobs running concurrently. You can't do that all off the top of your head. You have to have a process for managing. Even if you've got 3 or 4 jobs planned, you need to be able to project where you're going to need the different trades. If you're subbing out to people, they're going to need to know when they're required on site. And if you've got a Gantt chart planning the job, you can give that to them and say, well, look, Bill, I think we're going to need you on these 3 jobs, beginning of September, beginning of October, and so on. Much more specifically, and they will be able to track the progress of the job and adjust their own time. Because, as you know, your job can grind to a halt if people don't turn up on time. As we were seeing earlier, if you've got an overhead of 15% on your £500,000 business, your business is costing £1,500 a week to run. So if your program starts to slide, that £1,500 is going to come off your bottom line. Lose a month over the course of a year, and 6,000 quid has disappeared down the plug hole. So it's really important that you track your progress and keep on top, and that will help to protect your margins. For the benefit of those who've not used Gantt charts, the software automatically provides you with templates for different types of jobs, and you can very easily move these bars along to help you plan the job. They also plug into the estimating tool and will produce things like cash flow projections for your client, material schedules for you to understand when you need to think about ordering stuff. And in fact, every material that's in the software has got a suggested lead time. So something like a brick has probably got a 6-week lead time, or heads and sills, or roof trusses. So they help you to think about what is needed several weeks ahead of the game. And again, same issue. If you've forgotten to order those trusses or those heads and sills, your job can grind to a halt and it will cost you money. The software will also produce schedules that you can send to your suppliers to get advanced material prices. And in fact, you can use the software to merge the material requirements for multiple jobs. So if you've got half a dozen extensions planned over the course of the year, you can go to them and say, look, I've got all this work coming along. Can you give me your best price for blocks or timber or whatever it is, based on your workload rather than just the one job that you happen to have on the go at that moment. So again, that helps squeeze the prices. If you can squeeze your prices down by 2 or 3% across the board, that will go straight on to your bottom line. So worth doing. There's a screenshot of a typical list of materials that's come straight off the software. So it tells you exactly what you need, including waste. Most people will tend to order the materials excluding the waste and then top up on site as they require. Now, just very briefly, as we were talking earlier, it's a really good idea to have an accounting system that allows you to monitor your budget versus your actual. Otherwise, you get into the invidious position of you don't get your accounts until the accountant says, right, I've done your year-end accounts 3 months after the end of the year, and you discover to your horror that you haven't made any profit, or worse, you may even have made a loss. You need to keep a track of this so that you can adjust what you're doing. If you're finding that you're not allowing enough for your plastering or whatever, the software can tell you, and you can then make adjustments so that you don't repeat the same mistake on the following job. So we work with a company called CIA Accounts. It's worth having a look on our website to see about them, and you can export all your budgets, and it will then allow you to track what you're actually spending. It's got loads of other useful tools for your subcontract accounts, VAT, and so on. It's very specifically designed for the construction industry, and relatively easy to use. So, in terms of software, we're running well on time. I was a bit fearful that it would run over. We've got time to have a look at Estimator Express. So, as you can see from the screen, it helps you create estimates. It's got live pricing from merchant, builds in inflation, calculates your profit, produces decent quotes to give your clients, Gantt charts to plan it, and helps you negotiate better rates with merchants. So it's not just an estimating tool. It's a piece of software that will help you run your business and win more work profitably. So, what is Quick Quote? Well, Quick Quote is it's a tool that we introduced last year, and it's proved to be really popular because what we've actually managed to do with it is to create hundreds of standard templates of the most common houses and extension types that people come across. And in fact, you can actually Lego block different extensions together to give you even more complicated shapes. And I'm going to show you how that works. So here's an example of that Lego blocking of different house types, different extensions and houses together to give you a more complex job. So you can literally choose those 3 components that make up that extension and sort of clip them together, put half a dozen key dimensions in, and the software will work out all of the areas of walls, all of the foundations, all the roof angles and so on, and schedule all the materials for you. All you've then got to do is drop in doors and windows, and the building envelope is complete very quickly. So it makes it a really simple process. So there's a screenshot of the software in action. I'm going to show you how it actually does that. So before we actually go into the software, as we've got time, I'm going to tell you a few things about what the software does to deliver an accurate estimate. Otherwise, you think, well, how on earth does it do that? It can't be very accurate. It's very accurate. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my settings on the software, and you can see these are all the different elements that you can configure the software with. You can set the prices, you can set your profit margin that you want to have by default, you can manage bar charts, you can set the specifications so that the materials by default are the ones that you prefer. You can set your favorite materials from your favorite suppliers so that by default they are used automatically in the software. Okay, so let's move on. So one of the first things is, where do the prices come from? Well, we're very lucky to have material prices being downloaded from several of the major merchants, Jewson's, Travis, Graham's, Keyline, TradePoint, and a UPVC company called Crystal. Now, all of those material prices come down into the software along with a set of market average prices if you if you don't want to sign up with any of these particular merchants. You'll then need to spend a few minutes just checking the hourly rates that you're paying for your labour. How much are you paying for your brickies and chippies, and what are you paying for your plant? How much are you paying for a mixer and a JCB and so on? And all that information is merged into the quote to make sure that the quote reflects your cost structure for labour, plant and material, and not some generic price structure. We've then got a part of the system that we call the specification. And just reading this out, the spec allows you to precisely define what labour, plant and materials are used in your estimates. So for argument's sake, you may always want to use a particular block. You might love Thermalite, or you might like Lightag, your plastering system, you might use British Gypsum, or you might use Lafarge. It's entirely up to you. We ship the software already populated with typical products and prices so that you can start estimating out of the job. Some people, once they get into it though, they actually want to make sure that it's using their products precisely, and you can do that within the estimating system. It takes an hour or two to do it for sure, but then once you've done that, you've got it forever. You've only got to do it once in the library, and you can use it on every job that you ever price up. So just to give you a quick visual demonstration of that, you can download your prices from the merchants into the local price book on the system, and the spec is essentially a set of materials chosen from the price book. So have a quick look inside the spec. We're going to have a look at an extension spec. And I'm sorry if this is a little bit closely typed, but what you're looking at here is a part of the spec for an extension, and we're actually looking at the cavity wall spec. And you can see down the left-hand side here, there are numerous items that you have to think about when you're building a wall. I think there's about 80 items for building a wall in terms of the actual material and the labour to actually construct that element. And that's essentially what you're doing every time you're estimating. You're working out all those hundreds of items across a job. So if we have a look at this top line here, you can see, for argument's sake, the bricks above DPC in this cavity wall. By default, we've got a 75p brick. You can obviously change that to whatever price you want. They're 75p each. They're part of the brickwork shell, so that information is associated with the Gantt chart that we looked at. It'll tell you when you need to order those bricks. There are 60 of those bricks to the square metre. 60 times 70p is £45 a square metre. So the system is doing that for every element in the job. If we look at the bottom of the screen, you can see that the laying of those bricks, by default, we've got a 2-in-1 bricky gang in it. In this case, the hourly rate is set at £65 an hour for that 2-in-1 gang. You can, of course, set that to whatever you like. And again, thinking about where you position your price, I see that vary enormously. I've talked to people and they said, oh, we're only paying about £50 an hour for a gang at the moment. And literally 5 miles down the road, I'll speak to somebody and they'll say, oh no, we're paying 85 quid for a gang. And they are absorbing that price within their quote. So, you know, if for no other reason that the prices vary, the cost of their labour varies enormously. And as we know, the material prices vary enormously. Depending on who you buy your stuff from, how good you are at negotiating, you will pay a very different price. And again, with care and thought, you can exploit those differences to improve your profitability. Don't assume you've got to be the cheapest in the street. You haven't. Doesn't mean you can't buy effectively and pay your guys a lower rate, but trust me, you can charge more for it. So the prices come down from the web into the price book through the spec. The geometry of the project comes from the quick quote template. It works out what the surface area of your wall is, what the pitch of your roof is, how deep your foundations are, and so on, and schedules all that materials. Or you can also use the CAD system to trace over a drawing, and again the system will work out all of the lengths, areas, and so on, and merge that with the price book and the spec. So that again automatically produces your quote. Make sure it's very accurate, and on top of that you can then overlay it with your overheads and profit. All of this is made well, not relative, it's very simple as compared to doing it manually. So that's just a quote. So let's have a look at the that's a summary of a job. But I'm now going to switch into the software so that you can see it in action. Let's turn my Skype off. Right, so let's go into Estimator Express. So I've gone back to the main menu here, and generally speaking, you'll go straight into My Estimates. But you can, of course, go into My Settings, where you can set your prices, download material prices, edit your labour rates, and so on. I'm not going to go in there this evening. We've only got about 20 minutes. So let's go into My Estimates and create our quick quote estimate. So I go in there, press the New Estimate button, and choose the way that we're going to actually build the estimate. We could create it with a quick quote. We can do custom estimates, building them from first principles. We can import a drawing for that we've either designed an extension, or we've actually traced over an existing drawing, or we can go back to what we call traditional Estimator Express, where you build up the estimate from first principles. We're going to look at quick quote, which is the easiest way of doing most jobs. So first thing I need to do is put in the customer's name, and we're going to do an extension, and I'm going to do what we call select a job profile. If you look at these various values here, as soon as I select the profile, you'll see that all those values change. So you can see that the system has loaded a set of default materials. So it's using the extension specification, which defines my standard bricks and hourly rates and so on for the various labour items. By default, it's picked an ATP brick. Let's say in this particular job, I know that they're a bit cheaper, so I'm going to put a 70p brick in there. I am using a pan tile. I'm going to use plastic guttering and fascias. I'm going to have a standard specification, and because it's an extension, I'm using a mini digger rather than hand dig or a JCB. I can choose the Gantt chart that I want to use, and this gives me a default Gantt chart for a typical large extension, which I can then tweak. And I'm ready to create my estimate. Actually, what I will do is I can also review the profit margin. So I can set my profit margin here to whatever I like, 25, 30, 35%. And as I say, 30% is a good typical starter for 10 if you're wanting to maintain a reasonable margin. As your order book fills up, you should be able to tweak that up to a higher rate. You can also review the rate of inflation. Now, of course, there's a bit of pencil sucking to be done here because none of us really know what the inflation rate's going to be, but you can bet your boots it's not going to be zero. So what the program will do, based on the Gantt chart that you've prepared, it will actually inflate the cost of materials and build that into your quote if you request it to do. Now, I always say to people, why wouldn't you build in inflation? It's a real cost. By the time you get to the end of this project, everything is going to cost you a little bit more. Right, so here we are in the template picker, and I'll just expand this to fill the whole screen so that you get an idea of how many different specs, types of extension and house there are, and you can do it in render, you can do it in stone. So there are literally hundreds of different extension types that you can go for. I'm going to go back to a traditional brick and block extension, and we'll do something fairly straightforward. We'll do an apex double story extension. I could just as do any of the others. They all function in the same way. Okay, so the software then says, okay, you've said you want to do a brick and block extension. I'm happy with that. And these are all the things that the software will automatically take account of and display on the screen if I so wish. So I'm going to say yes, I'm going to leave all those ticked. But if you want to, I could leave some of them out so I don't overwhelm myself with information. Click OK, and the software then creates the template ready for me to start inputting information. So let's assume, for argument's sake, that my extension is projecting 4.2 meters. And let's assume that it's also 4.2 meters, so I'll leave that. It doesn't matter, I can change it to whatever value I like. I can confirm that I'm plastering, decorating, allowing for internal finishes to the wall where the extension adjoins the house. I want to finish that. I'm not going to decorate the fascias because I know by default I've got plastic fascias. I can set my foundation depths. I can set my ceiling heights, my floor thicknesses. If I was doing a house, I might have a staircase and trimmers. I can set the pitch of my roof. I can set the pitch of the existing roof. I can set the pitch of my lath and my soffit width. So the system now knows all about the geometry. If I said to the system, prepare me an estimate now, what it would do is do the complete brick shell, slabs, upper floor and tile, but without any doors and windows, with a brick and block specification. Now clearly we're going to want to do doors and windows, so I'm going to show you how you do that. Incidentally, at this stage, even though I've initially said I want to do a brick and block, I could change the specification of the upstairs and downstairs walls to render or structurally insulated panels, ICF, and so on. I can have a concrete ground bearing slab, or I could change that. So say I wanted to change that to a beam and block floor with a screed, pick that, and the system will automatically do that for me. I'm going to go for an uninsulated timber floor. I could change it if I wanted to. I'm going to do a cut roof. I'm going to plaster and insulate the ceiling, and I'm going to have a structural opening upstairs and downstairs in this example. So I've got openings to existing walls, and I'm going to do a couple of openings that are 3 meters wide, set that to 3, set the height into the thickness of the walls, the end bearing, whether I want pad stones or bricks. I'm going to use pad stones, spoil bulking factor, whether I want to plaster the reveals and so on. Click finish, and the software has automatically calculated that once I put in that I want one downstairs and one upstairs. If I wanted to, of course, I could have a structural opening downstairs and an internal door upstairs from the bedroom or whatever. It's entirely up to you. The system will then allow me to automatically plaster the existing walls, and if you want, it will allow you to plaster the inside of the house and so on, because you may well be disturbing that when you bang a big hole in it. Obviously the software is going to take account of the structural opening in the wall. I'm then going to add a patio door. Now I could use the crystal doors. There's several thousand doors to pick from there, but for speed I'm going to pick a bifold door from a standard range. So let's pick say a 3 meter bifold door for downstairs, and I want one of those. I want some windows. Again, I could pick from the crystal windows, but for speed I'm going to pick a standard one. So a couple of those 312Cs, and I want one of those downstairs. Let's say a couple of those, one on the back and one on the side. I could add roof windows if I wanted to. If I was doing something a bit bigger, I could have internal partitions, whether they're cavity block walls or stud walls and so on, single walls. All of these can be added just by entering the length in. Same for stud walls, sleeper walls and so on. In this particular case, I've got no internal doors, but I could just as well add those in the same way as I've added roof. So you can see that very quickly, in 4 or 5, 10 minutes or whatever, I'm really getting to grips with the overall structure. If I want to, at this stage, I could just put some provisional sums in for plumbing and heating, and apart from the drains, I'm pretty well done. But I'm going to assume that I'm going to do this more fulsome. So I'm going to do the upstairs room, so which is a bedroom. I just put the size. It's 3.6 internally. Height of the walls is the same. It's 2.4, as we said earlier. I've got some openings upstairs, so I've got those 2 windows to put in, and I've got an opening. So you can see that they've been associated with this particular job. and I then want to add some electrical items. So my bedroom upstairs, by clicking that and selecting that, the software is saying, okay, typically you'd want to put in a ceiling rose, a light switch and 3 double sockets. If you wanted, you could change that, and you can also add all sorts of other fittings. But again, for speed, I'm just going to leave it with the default. Meanwhile, we've then got some plumbing to go in there. Press that, it calculates the area of the room, and from that it suggests a typical radiator based on the area of the room. If you want, you can say, well, I think that's a bit over the top. We tend to oversize the radiators and change it if you wish. But you can see that it's allowed for the rad valves, lock shield and so on. So with a couple of clicks you've done that. I could also add things like tiling of the floor and so on. So all of the things that you would want to do within a room, you can do within the room tool template. So let's close that. And I can add another room for the downstairs. Let's assume it's a dining room. Enter the size of the room again. Incidentally, you can use this tool set for doing renovation work, and it works in exactly the same way. So my electricals for my dining room, select that. I need to link the openings for the downstairs because that will impact on the heating system. Add it for the dining room. And again, it scheduled all the radiators. So that's that done. I've got no extra plastering to done. I've got no structural steels. So all of these things have got their own calculators, which you just select and enter the information into them. These tools here allow you to enter electrical items one by one. So you could instead of using the automated system, you could actually go in there and choose the electrics very specifically at this level. On the fitting out side, I'll just show you what that's all about. You can see there's all sorts of fitting out that you can do with engineered floors and tiling, vinyl floors and so on and so forth. On the drainage side, again, you can lay out all of the drainage with individual components, or you can prepare a budget very quickly using one of the standard templates. So we've only got some surface water on this particular job, so I've got a couple of rainwater outlets. I'm going to pick that, select, and the software says, okay, for your 2 connections, here is a budget length for each of the components and some suggested fittings, 45-degree bends, 87.5 and so on. And you can tweak that if you wish, or you can say, that's great, it's given me a good budget, that's all, I'm quite happy to run with that. On the external work side, you can add patios and so on. Define the size of your patio. Let's say it's the width of the actual job. Thickness of sand blinding and hardcore. And maybe it goes out 4 meters or so on. You can define what plant you need, spend a few minutes checking that out, press finish, and that's estimated that. You can then add your prelims and sundries. Things like cleaning, scaffolding, site acquisition costs, cement mixers, all the things that you can think of. Spend 5 or 10 minutes running through that, and you're ready to rock and roll with your estimate. Incidentally, if you're doing the same sort of job all the time, you can set up templates that have got these presets. So if you do lots of rear extensions, you can have these set up so that you can do all your prelims with a single click. So the software gets faster and faster, so eventually you're doing estimates in 10 minutes rather than half an hour. Okay, so once we've done that, press quick, create the quote, and the software will then build the estimate for you. So it's going to go off there, it's going to get the geometry of the extension, work out all the surface areas, all the foundation depths, the volume of excavation that you've got to do, the amount of skips that you need, work out the area of beam and block floors, the screed on it. It's going to work out how many doors and windows you need. It's going to plaster the reveals, work out the angle beads around the windows, the seal around the windows, lintels that are required over them. It's going to work out the area of your floor joists, the chipboard, the plasterboard, the paint on the ceilings, the joist hangers if they're required, straps. Same with the roof, plaster that, work out your gable straps, your noggings, your valley boards, lead work. Absolutely everything has been done automatically by just selecting that basic geometry. And you can see that the software is building that on screen, taking a couple of minutes. Now, I don't know how long it's actually taken us. I think it's taken us about a quarter of an hour to run through that and describe it with you. So you can see you can do quite complicated jobs relatively quickly. It's then doing a lintel check, just asking me to provide the width of the cavity. The software will then quickly check all the doors and windows and make sure that there's a suitable lintel for each window. So the software tries to think about everything for you. If you're doing this manually or on a spreadsheet, I'm sure you know that you will spend many, I wouldn't say happy hours, but many hours thinking about all this and worrying what you've forgotten about. The software does not tend to forget stuff. It's got a pretty good memory. Right, so we've got our basic cost. There's no profit or overheads or inflation being allowed for it, or VAT. This is just the raw cost based on the prices that I've got for my labour and the downloaded catalogues that I've got in my system. I don't have any discounts with Jewson's and Travis and so on in mine because I no longer build. I'm quite busy running the software company. But had I got those in, or the prices that you've entered yourself, you don't have to use any of these prices. You can enter those in and manage them yourselves. Or some people say, well, I buy a lot of my stuff locally and from a small merchant, enter those in, but all the small stuff, like, I don't know, bags of cement and sealant and so on, which don't really impact on the cost, you can draw those down from the standard prices. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the Gantt chart. So here's a typical Gantt chart, and you can see that we've got the design phase at the top here. We've got the allowance for planning application. Now let's say in your locality planning is really good, and they're doing it in the prescribed 8 weeks. You can just tweak that down, press Cascade, and it reprograms the rest of the job. However, you may say, well, I'm not 100% sure I'm going to get planning, so I'm not going to go in for building regs until I've definitely got the building regs coming through. So if I select building regs, I can move that along, then I can cascade that, and you can see the whole graph has moved along. So I can go through each of these bars and tweak them. So in 5 minutes, I've got an accurate Gantt chart for the entire job. If I press refresh, it then just fits the entire Gantt chart in. So there's a task there for every element of the job. So do that, and then we'll have a look in the reports section. And there are numerous reports to help you understand the cost in your job. So let's have a look at a cost summary first of all. Click on that and open it. And you can see here that the software has then broken down the cost by the different build phases. Okay, you'll say, well, that's very interesting, but where's that 9,820 gone, including waste? It's 10,000. Okay, so it's building. You can see it's building in waste there for you. If I drag this button down, you can then see it's breaking it down into the labour and material. If I drag down another button, you can see that it's breaking it down into all of the constituent elements for the job. What are those brickies actually doing for that money? Drag that down, and you can see the total cost line by line for every item in the job. All of that has been done essentially by putting in half a dozen key dimensions for the overall extension type. And as I say, you can Lego block numerous extensions together to give you very complicated projects. Okay, so just to finish this, let's have a quick look at material schedules. So if I wanted to send a quotation inquiry off to my merchants, you can see here I've got a complete schedule of all the materials that I need, including wastage, so they can give me their best price for each item. Again, all of that's just cascaded off the back of our template. And as I was saying earlier, you can merge this information together for numerous jobs so that you can get better prices across the board. So let's now have a look at a quick quotation that you can provide for your client. So I'm going to go into a customer quote by build phase. It's just reminding me that I haven't put the customer's name and address in there, but I am going to continue. And it then says to me, okay, what sort of quote do you want to do? Well, you can give them quite a detailed quote by putting in the key resources. If you want to give them just a headline price, you can do that. So you can see it just says to build the foundations, there's the price. And in fact, some people use both techniques. They will produce a detailed quote so that they can run through it with their client. But rather than leave the quote with them until they've signed the contract, they also do an abbreviated quote and say, now that you understand the job, here's an abbreviated quote. I'll leave it with you. If you've got any questions, come back to me. Some people are fearful that, once you've done all this work, they'll just dole the quote out for lots of other builders to price. And I'm sure it's a valid concern. It wasn't one that I had particularly when I was doing it, because it was all about building the confidence in you. So by the time you went back to them, you'd given them a pretty good idea of what the price was likely to be because of experience and square meter costs. When you delivered the quote, it was really a confirmation that you knew what you were talking about. Here was the detail, and they were ready to sign. A little trick I used to use, not trick actually, that's the wrong word, tip, is I found it quite useful once I'd given the client the quote and run through it to make my excuses for a few minutes to perhaps go out to the van or go and measure something outside. And that would give the client a few minutes to chat amongst themselves, usually a husband and wife. And often I found that when I returned, they'd made the decision that they liked what they saw, and they would buy the job. And I wasn't the cheapest in the street. I wasn't ripping anybody off. I was making a good living for myself and my guys. I paid them well. I had to pay them a good rate because I needed them to come back. As you can imagine, when you've got 10 or 15 jobs running concurrently, the last thing you want is people not turning up on site. So it worked very well for everybody. The client got good value, we made a good living, and we built a good business, as I say, building hundreds of extensions. I think probably in today's terms, over a 15-year period, we did something of the order of 50 million quid's worth of work. So, a sizable business basically built on the back of software. So, sorry, I digress. So, we're going to go for key resources. We're going to put a subtotal for each phase. If I turn any of these off, you see it hides them. I want my little picture in there or not. You can put your own pictures in there if you want. I want to build in inflation. You can even show order quantities. It's what I tended to do because, again, it builds confidence with the client. If they can see the quantities that are in there, they know where all their money's going. It's also really useful for things like, say you were putting in roof windows. If you've specified the number that you've got in there, there's no ambiguity. They can see that you put in 2. If they say, well, I thought I was getting 3, we can say, well, let's have a look in the quote. There it is. It's in black and white. I found it a really useful thing to do. We can also use what we call customer-friendly descriptions. If you look at this label here, for argument's sake, you can see it's got some technical stuff at the end of it. If I use customer-friendly descriptions, it actually abbreviates the actual description of the material that's in use. It gives you a little bit more flexibility when you're buying to, perhaps buy stuff that's, better priced or on special offer when you're actually building the job. So I press print, set the rate of VAT, and the software will build the quote. So there's no, having spent several hours preparing the quote, you haven't then got to settle down and type or get a secretary or your wife to type it out for you. It's done for you automatically. So the software it's not only an estimating tool, it has the potential to if you're running a small business, to actually change, almost to change your life, really. It probably sounds a bit grand, but it can save so much time. People often say to us, I've got my life back, whereas when I was running the business, all I seemed to do was work, work, work. It's a sort of perpetual homework that one finds oneself doing. Okay, so let's have a look here. Obviously, the customer's name and address isn't in there, which would appear on that page. So if we scroll down here, oops, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. If I scroll down here, you can see that the materials are all scheduled in detail. So because we asked for quantities, you can see, let's go back to the beginning of foundation, you can see the volume of concrete in the foundations and obviously the cost for that phase. The beauty of providing the phase cost is that as soon as you've done that, you can start issuing invoices to make sure that you're being paid in a timely fashion. All the materials are scheduled. Incidentally, the amount that's actually shown here is the quantity excluding wastage. You're not actually displaying the wastage as well. So if your client starts counting the number of bricks, that's going to be pretty close to what you'll get, even though we all know that there will be wastage. You can also see that it's we're in the brickwork shell, and it's starting to pull together the information relating to the different doors and window openings, dummy frames and so on have all been allowed for. There's the drainage, first floor joists and so on. All the information relating to the roof structure. There you can see we've got the valley boards are all worked out, gutter angles, gutter clips, swan necks, all carefully calculated. There's the two steels going in. Or sorry, they're 2 3-meter openings, so you can see that with the end bearings you've got the 6.6 meters times 2. Roof tiling, electrical first fix, external works, joinery, plumbing first fix, plastering. We think the plastering is quite interesting because you can see that it's plastered the roof. There's the screed. There's the plastering to the structural openings, connecting wall plastering, reveals to windows and so on. So all of the different surfaces are automatically picked up by the software. There's the electrical. You can see we've got all the sockets and so on for the different rooms. And so it goes on. So you can see if you look at the bottom left-hand corner here, you've got a 16-page detailed quote right the way down to the decoration. Finally, an overall figure there, VAT and so on. So hopefully you can see that if you take a good quality quote, having spent the time with the client, your chances of winning the job are dramatically improved. And if you like, and I would say this, wouldn't I, the cost of the software pales into insignificance. You can up your margins quite comfortably to a sensible rate where you can build a sustainable business to support you and your family. So have a look at it. Call our support team, our sales team, and they will be able to give you further demonstrations and help you to purchase the software in a way that suits yourself. So that's about it, really. I forgot to glance at the questions. I don't think I can see any questions from anybody. So if anybody has any questions now's a good time. I've stopped talking. Let me know if you have any questions. No, it doesn't look as though anybody's got any questions. That's a shame. It's always nice to get a bit of feedback. Tony Bird has got his hand up. I'm not quite sure what that means. I don't know whether he wants to speak to me or whether he's done it by accident. Now it looks as though Tony's self-muting himself, or he hasn't got a speaker, a microphone. Okay, so if there's no further questions, I'm going to close the demonstration now. Thanks for coming. I know it's been quite a heavy session, but hopefully you've found it useful. If you have any questions, please let me know and I'll endeavour to answer them in due course. Thank you very much indeed. Cheerio. Thank you for your comments, please. That was really good to get your comments. Thank you. I've just seen them now.